At 19, Maribel owned three things that mattered: a canvas valise with one black dress inside, a carpenter's brass square that had belonged to her father, and a deed nobody in Carter's Ridge would have taken as a gift. The deed was to Pike Relay, an abandoned Confederate courier house high in the Cumberland Mountains. The roof was split, the windows were empty. The road to it had not been cleared since the war. In town, people called it a wind trap, a rat nest, a place where a woman alone would not last until the first hard frost. That was exactly why Harlan Voss gave it to her. He had already taken back the bedroom she had shared with his dead son. He had already locked the parlor cabinet where her wedding silver was kept. Then, on a cold October morning in 1881, he placed $18 on his desk and told his daughter-in-law to leave before supper. Mara did not know it then, but the worthless courier house he used as punishment was the one building in his entire empire that still knew the truth. Behind its chimney wall sat a sealed federal pay chest. Inside that chest were gold coins, field ledgers, and a dead captain's confession. And on those pages was the proof that Harlan Voss, the richest Confederate patriot in the county, had bought his power by selling both armies to each other. Maribel had been raised to notice what other people missed. Her father, Darius Pike, was a joiner, not a rich man, but a careful one. He built doors that closed clean in summer and winter. He cut stair rails so smooth a child could slide a hand along them without catching a splinter. He kept one brass square wrapped in oiled cloth, and he treated it like a Bible with a handle. "A bad corner will talk," he used to tell Mara. "You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." He died when she was 16. A lung fever took him in 5 days and left her with his tools, his debts, and his habit of testing everything twice. That habit was what first drew Ellis Voss to her. Ellis was Harlan Voss's second son, the quiet one. His older brother ran accounts for the family timber office. Ellis preferred ridge paths, creek crossings, and the old war roads that had grown over with fern. He could name a hawk by the shape of its wing against the sky. Mara could tell whether an abandoned cabin was worth saving by the sag of its sill beam. They married in spring against Harlan's wishes. Harlan had wanted land tied to land, money tied to money, a marriage that would make the Voss name heavier in every ledger in the county. Instead, Ellis brought home a joiner's daughter with work-room hands and eyes that measured every room she entered. Harlan never shouted at her. He did not need to. His house did the shouting for him. It sat above Carter's Ridge like a courthouse, pretending to be a home, white columns in front, black walnut inside, every door polished, every servant silent, every window looking down. During the war, Harlan had been known as a loyal Southern supplier. After the war, when most men were counting graves and debts, his fortune somehow grew. He bought the sawmill, then the tannery, then the county bank, then mortgages, then men. By the time Mara married Ellis, half the valley owed Harlan something. Ellis hated that house, but he loved his father enough to keep trying to believe there was still a decent man buried somewhere inside him. For 2 years, Mara and Ellis lived carefully, saving coins, planning a cabin of their own near Wolf Laurel Creek. Ellis carved her a little fox from a piece of red cedar because, he said, it looked like her when she was solving a problem, small, still, and entirely awake. Then the logging cable snapped. It happened at Voss Camp No. 3 in late September. A loaded sled broke loose on the wet grade, and the iron cable whipped back through the rain. Ellis was struck before anyone could call his name. The funeral was large because Harlan made sure it was large. Men came in black coats with wet hats in their hands. Women cried into handkerchiefs. Harlan stood at the head of the grave like a monument to grief, dry-eyed and upright. Mara stood beside him and understood that she had become temporary. For 4 weeks she moved through the Voss house like a shadow that had not yet been swept away. Servants stopped meeting her eyes. Her place at supper moved farther from Harlan's end of the table. Once, When she reached for Ellis's field coat in the hall, Harlan's clerk stepped forward and took it from the peg before her fingers touched the sleeve. "Inventory," he said. On the 29th morning after the burial, Harlan summoned her to his office. The room smelled of lamp oil, calfskin, and old tobacco. The account books were stacked in precise towers. Harlan stood behind his desk, broad-shouldered, silver-bearded, and clean as a blade. "Ellis left no child," he said. "No independent property, no provision outside what the law requires." Mara looked at the folded paper on his desk. Harlan tapped it with one finger. "I have arranged something more generous than you can claim. $18 in cash and a parcel in your name." He slid the deed toward her. "Pike Relay," he said. 22 acres, more or less. An old courier house above Crow Notch. It is poor land and poorer shelter, but it is shelter. No one can accuse me of turning my son's widow into the road." The cruelty was neat enough to shine. Mara knew Pike Relay. Ellis had once pointed to the ridge from a hunting trail and told her the Confederates used it to move messages, ammunition receipts, and payroll drafts away from the main roads. After Appomattox, it had been abandoned. Storms took the shutters, boys broke the glass, hunters slept there when they were desperate and left before dark. It was not charity, it was exile with a legal description. Mara folded the deed once, then twice, and placed it in her valise beside her father's brass square. "I will be gone by evening," she said. Harlan looked almost disappointed that she did not cry. By dusk she had left the Voss house with her valise in one hand and the carved cedar fox in her coat pocket. The road out of Carter's Ridge passed the bank, the tannery, the sawmill, the church, and 6 farms Harlan held by mortgage. People watched from porches and wagon seats. No one stopped her. In a county where Harlan Voss owned paper on nearly every roof, pity had learned to keep its mouth shut. Mara walked until the town lamps disappeared behind the trees. The cold came down after midnight. She slept under a rock shelf with her knees pulled to her chest, the valise for a pillow, and woke with frost silvering the hem of her dress. By the second afternoon, the wagon road narrowed to 2 ruts and a strip of grass. By the third, there was no road at all, only a mule path climbing through laurel and chestnut. Pike Relay appeared at sunset. It was smaller than the stories made it and stronger than the stories deserved. The front porch had fallen at one end. The roof sagged where 3 cedar shakes had rotted away in a line. The door hung crooked. One window frame was empty, except for a triangle of greenish glass. But the walls were chestnut logs, hand-hewn and notched deep. The foundation stones had barely shifted. The chimney rose broad and dark on the west wall, built of mountain granite, ugly and stubborn and straight. Mara stood in the weeds with hunger in her belly and grief in her throat. Then she took out the brass square. The door frame was twisted, but the main posts were sound. The south sill had rot, but not enough to kill the wall. The roof could be patched if she could get cedar. The chimney drew when she held a smoking twig near the throat. Whoever built the place had known his work. For the first time since Ellis died, Mara felt something other than loss. A problem. A real problem, with edges, weight, and possible answers. She spent that night on a swept patch of dirt floor, wrapped in her shawl while wind worked through the empty windows. The cedar fox stayed in her fist. Above her, the rafters creaked, but they did not give. She listened like her father had taught her to listen. The house was hurt. It was not dead. The next days became a list, and the list kept her alive. Water came first. She found a spring below the ridge where moss grew black on the stones. Fire came next. She cut deadfall with a broken saw blade left by some hunter and dragged branches until her palms split. She stuffed gaps in the log walls with moss and clay. She nailed her spare petticoat over the worst window. She built a narrow bed from 2 old feed planks and a heap of pine boughs. Every repair made the place less like a sentence. Every evening she sat before the chimney and felt the room learn her shape. On the 6th day, while scraping soot from the firebox, she saw the first lie in the wall. Most of the chimney had thick mortar joints, gray with age and smoke. But on the right side, just beyond the firebox, 6 stones sat too neatly. The joints were thinner. The mortar was paler. Not new, exactly, but younger. A patch made by another hand. Mara put down the scraper. A bad corner will talk. She pressed her palm against the stones. Nothing moved. She took her father's brass square and tapped the lower course. Stone answered stone. Dull, dull, dull. Then one block near the floor gave back a low, hollow knock. Mara stopped breathing. She tapped again. The sound was not imagination. It was space. The next morning she began working the mortar with a bent iron spike. It was miserable work. The spike slipped. Her knuckles bled. Grit filled her nails. Twice she had to stop and warm her fingers over the fire because they would not close. But grief had burned so much out of her that what remained was hard to exhaust. By late afternoon, the first stone shifted. She wedged the spike deeper and pushed with both hands. The block slid forward with a slow scrape, bringing with it a mouthful of cold black air. Mara widened the opening by 2 stones, lit a strip of fat pine and crawled through sideways. Behind the chimney was a chamber no larger than a pantry. It should have been damp. It was dry. It should have been empty. It was not. An iron-banded chest sat against the back wall. Beside it lay a leather dispatch bag, a tin tube sealed with wax, and a stack of oilcloth-wrapped books so carefully placed they looked less abandoned than waiting. Mara held the torch higher. Dust had softened every edge. Spiderwebs hung like old lace. The air smelled of iron, paper, and something locked away too long. The chest was too heavy to move and locked with a rusted army padlock. She left it and opened the dispatch bag first. Inside were ledgers, not family ledgers, military ledgers. The first page carried a heading stamped in fading blue. United States Army, Department of the Cumberland, Special Accounts. Mara turned a page, names, dates, amounts, payments for guides, payments for forage, payments for intelligence. Then she saw the name, H. Voss, Route Survey, Forked Deer Road, $40 gold. 2 pages later again, H. Voss, location of Confederate stores, Crow Notch, $75 gold. Then again, H. Voss, names of Southern courier riders operating through Carter's Ridge. Mara's fingers went cold around the page. Harlan Voss had built his life on being the man who never bent to the Union. He made speeches every Memorial Day. He paid for stone markers. He stood in church while mothers of dead soldiers thanked him for his loyalty. In this hidden room, the paper said otherwise. The tin tube held a map of the ridge roads, marked in 2 inks, blue arrows for Federal movement, red crosses for Confederate supply points. The handwriting beside the marks was not military. It was local, sharp, slanted, familiar from every banknote Harlan had ever signed. At the bottom of the dispatch bag, Mara found an envelope. It was addressed to any officer or loyal citizen who finds this place. The letter inside was dated April 9, 1865. Captain Nathaniel Reed wrote with a hand that had begun steady and ended ragged. He had been an Army paymaster assigned to carry Federal gold and intelligence files through the mountains during the collapse of the war. His local contact, a businessman named Harlan Voss, had promised a safe route. Instead, Voss led him into an ambush. Reed escaped wounded and hid the chest, ledgers and maps in the false chimney chamber of Pike Relay. He wrote that Voss had sold information to both sides, then arranged for dead men to carry the blame. The last line was pressed so hard the pen tore the paper. The gold is not the worst of what he stole. Mara sat on the stone floor until the fat pine burned down close to her hand. Outside, the wind moved through the empty window frames. Inside, the richest man in Carter's Ridge changed shape in her mind. He was no longer merely cruel. He was crooked all the way through, and the county had been living inside the house he built. She did not sleep that night. At dawn, she broke the chest lock. It took a flat rock, the bent spike, and more anger than strength. The lock finally cracked, and the lid lifted with a groan. Gold filled the chest in stacked cloth rolls, Union double eagles, some loose, some counted and sealed, enough to buy a farm, enough to buy many farms, enough perhaps to buy back what Harlan had taken from everyone. Mara touched one coin and no more. Gold was dangerous because it made people hurry. Paper was more dangerous because it made powerful men afraid. She closed the chest, replaced the stones loosely, and spent the next hour scrubbing every trace of dust from her hands. By noon she had made her first decision. She would not run into town screaming treason. Harlan owned the sheriff, the bank, the newspaper, and most of the men who would be asked to believe her. A young widow living in a ruin could be called unstable before she finished her first sentence. So she did what her father would have done. She began with the foundation. First, she needed the house made strong enough to protect what it held. She sewed 7 gold coins into the waistband of her dress and walked north to Bristow, where no one knew her. There she bought a felling axe, a bow saw, glass panes, hinges, nails, flour, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil, and a wool blanket thick enough to survive a mountain January. The storekeeper bit 1 coin, stared at her, and asked no more questions when she stared back. She paid a freight man to haul the load as far as the old lime kiln. From there, Mara carried it up the mountain piece by piece. The work changed her body. Her shoulders hardened, her hands stopped bleeding and began to callous. She reset the door, she patched the roof, she glazed 2 windows. She built a shutter bar from oak and pegged it with her father's awl. Pike Relay no longer looked abandoned. That was when Harlan noticed she had not died. 2 men came up the ridge on a wet morning, both wearing Voss timber coats. They claimed they had come to inspect the parcel boundaries. They looked at her new hinges, the glass, the smoke from the chimney, the stacked firewood under cover. One of them smiled. "Mr. Voss did not expect you to make such improvements." Mara stood in the doorway with the axe in her right hand, not raised, not hidden. "Mr. Voss gave me a deed," she said. "I believed him." The smile left his face. After they rode away, Mara opened the wall and moved the ledgers into a flour sack beneath her bed. She carried the chest deeper into the hidden chamber, covered it with flat stones, and replaced the false wall more carefully than before. She needed witnesses. The first was Eli Rusk. Eli lived in a black cabin above Rockwater Creek and trapped more than he farmed. Harlan had taken his bottomland years earlier over a loan Eli swore had been altered after signing. Ellis had trusted him. That was enough for Mara. When Eli opened his door, he held a shotgun low and looked at her as if deciding whether she was a problem or a ghost. "I am Mara Bell," she said. "Ellis Voss was my husband. I know who you are. I need cedar shakes and a man who hates Harlan Voss more than he fears him." Eli studied her face. Then he stepped aside. He came the next morning with a fro, a mallet, and no questions. For 3 days they split cedar, mended roof gaps, and worked without speaking of anything that mattered. On the 4th night, while rain beat the new shakes and the chimney pulled clean, Mara showed him 1 ledger page. Eli read it twice. His weathered hand closed slowly into a fist. "My brother rode that courier road," he said. "They told us Federals caught him by chance." Mara said nothing. "Wasn't chance," Eli whispered. "The second witness was Dr. Ansel Tabb, once the best physician in the valley. Now a tired old man who treated poor families for vegetables and firewood because Harlan had ruined his practice with rumors after a debt dispute." Mara did not show him the gold. She showed him Captain Reed's letter. The doctor put on his spectacles. Halfway down the first page, his mouth opened. At the signature, he sat down hard. "Nathaniel Reed was my wife's cousin," he said. "His mother died believing he deserted with federal money." His eyes filled, but his voice stayed sharp. "Child, this paper is a loaded pistol. Do not point it until you know where every person in the room is standing." So the 3 of them built their case. Not quickly, correctly. Dr. Tabb copied names from the ledgers and matched them to dates of ambushes. missing payrolls, burned barns, seized farms, and soldiers whose families had been told clean lies. Eli carried messages through ridge paths Harlan's men did not know. Mara kept Pike Relay warm, hidden, and ready. The truth spread only where it could take root. A widow named Cora Meade came with a basket of beans and left knowing why her father had died near Crow Notch. A mill hand named Jarrett Sloan repaired Mara's porch and learned that the pay cut Harlan blamed on war losses had followed a secret gold payment. A schoolteacher with a brother buried under the wrong accusation copied 3 pages in a hand no court clerk could dismiss. Harlan still looked powerful from the road, but under him the joists had begun to shift. The darkest day came in November, with sleet ticking against the windows. The sheriff arrived at Pike Relay with Harlan's clerk and a paper claiming back taxes on the property. The amount was absurd, the ink was fresh, the threat was not. Until payment is settled, the sheriff said, this structure and its contents are subject to seizure. Mara felt the room narrow around her. If they crossed the threshold and found the hidden chamber before she was ready, the whole case could vanish into Harlan's stove by nightfall. She reached into her apron pocket and took out 1 Union double eagle. The sheriff stared at it. Apply this to the tax, she said. Give me a receipt. The clerk's face went pale. Not because of the value of the coin, but because of the year stamped on it, 1864. For one brief second he understood there was a door in this story he had not seen. Mara watched him understand, then she smiled. Tell Mr. Voss the house is still standing. That night they made their move. Dr. Tabb selected 1 ledger page dated October 17, 1864. It recorded payment to H. Voss for the exact wagon route of a Confederate medical supply train. That train had been burned 2 days later. 9 local men died in the fight, including Cora Meade's father and Eli Rusk's brother. Mara placed the copied ledger page in an envelope with 1 gold coin and a strip of Captain Reed's map showing Harlan's handwriting. No threat, no demand, only 3 words written in Mara's plain hand. This wall opened. Eli left the envelope on the front step of the Voss house before dawn. By breakfast, Harlan Voss knew he was no longer the only man in Carter's Ridge who understood ledgers. He did not come to Pike Relay. He did not send riders. For the first time in Mara's life, Harlan became quiet because he was afraid. Within 6 days, the county bank announced a private sale of certain Voss interests to an investment concern from Knoxville. The newspaper called it consolidation. Dr. Tabb called it bleeding before the knife went in. The concern was not from Knoxville in any meaningful way. Its lawyer was a cousin of Dr. Tabb. Its money came from the federal pay chest, converted carefully, slowly, never in a pattern that could be followed by a clerk loyal to Harlan. The bank changed hands first, then the sawmill, then the tannery, then 43 farm notes that Harlan had used like ropes around men's throats. Families who expected foreclosure received revised terms. Mill workers were offered shares instead of script. The tannery books were opened and wages corrected back 3 years. No one stood in the square and shouted Harlan's disgrace. They did not need to. A powerful man can survive anger. He cannot survive everyone quietly learning the shape of his fraud at once. On the 2nd Monday of December, Harlan Voss left Carter's Ridge in a closed carriage before sunrise. His White House was shuttered. His office safe was empty. His portrait disappeared from the bank wall by noon. Some said he went west. Some said he crossed the border under another name. Mara never asked. She had not wanted his body in the road. She had wanted his weight off the valley. Winter settled hard that year. Snow covered the ridge path until Pike Relay looked cut off from the world, but it was not lonely anymore. Smoke rose from the chimney every morning. Eli kept the woodshed full without being asked. Cora Meade brought dried apples and a quilt with uneven stitching. Millmen came on Sundays to finish the porch. Dr. Tabb kept the ledgers in a locked box under his floor until the right legal hands could receive them. By March, the old courier house had a new roof, 4 glass windows, a plank floor, and shelves lined with flour, beans, coffee, and medicine. Travelers began stopping there again, not because war required it, but because the mountain did. A storm-bound woman with 2 children slept by Mara's fire one night. A circuit preacher left books. A freedman hauling tinware traded her a new kettle for 3 meals and dry socks. The house that Harlan meant as a grave became a crossing place. Mara kept the cedar fox on the mantel. Beside it sat her father's brass square, not polished, not displayed like treasure, used because that was what had saved her. Not gold first, not vengeance first. A habit of testing what powerful men insisted was solid. Harlan Voss had believed value was whatever he could take. Title, timber, wages, land, names, grief, even truth. He believed a poor widow could be measured at $18 and sent into the cold with a ruin around her shoulders. But he had forgotten something every crooked builder forgets. A wall can hide a lie for years. Then one patient hand finds the hollow place. Mara Bell was 19 when she walked into the mountains with a deed meant to bury her. By spring, the house was warm, the valley was breathing, and Harlan Voss's empire had fallen because the woman he dismissed knew how to listen when a bad corner talked.